The town of Cedar Ridge sat like a dusty scar on the Arizona territory, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the endless expanse of red rock and sagebrush. It was late autumn of 1889, and the wind carried the scent of mesquite and distant rain that would never quite reach the parched earth. Main Street stretched barely 200 yards, lined with the usual establishments that marked civilization's stubborn foothold in the wilderness. Murphy's General Store, the Sunset Saloon, Doc Henderson's office, and the small chapel that doubled as a schoolhouse. It was here, every Tuesday morning, that she appeared like a specter from some forgotten tragedy. The townspeople called her the Widow in Black, though her given name was Ayanna. She moved through the dusty streets with the quiet grace of her Apache heritage, her long black dress trailing behind her like a shadow. Her hair, dark as a moonless night, hung loose down her back in the traditional manner of mourning. But it was her eyes that unsettled folks most, deep brown pools that seemed to look through people rather than at them, as if she saw something beyond the physical world that others could not perceive. "There she goes again," muttered Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the banker's wife, peering through the lace curtains of her parlor window. "Mark my words, Sarah, that woman carries death with her like other women carry a purse." Sarah Mackenzie, younger and more given to romantic notions, watched the solitary figure with a mixture of fear and fascination. "But she's so beautiful. Eleanor, even in all that black, there's something unnatural is what there is." Eleanor interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper. 3 husbands. Sarah. 3. And every last one of them dead before their time. The story of Ayanna's husbands had become legend in Cedar Ridge, growing more elaborate with each telling. The first, a cavalry soldier named Lieutenant James Morrison, had been found with a bullet in his back near Apache Pass, supposedly from raiders, though no raiders had been seen in the area for months. The second, a prospector called William "Billy" Tate, had died from a rattlesnake bite, found stiff and cold in their cabin with the snake nowhere to be found. The third and most recent, Thomas Fletcher, a merchant from back east, had simply vanished during a sandstorm 2 summers past. His body was never recovered. In the Sunset Saloon, where truth and whiskey flowed in equal measure, the stories grew darker still. "I heard tell she learned the old Apache ways from her grandmother," slurred Pete Garrison, a ranch hand who'd never met a tale he couldn't embellish. "Medicine woman taught her how to call spirits, how to curse a man with just a look." "That's foolish talk," said Samuel Cooper, the blacksmith, though he crossed himself as he spoke. "But I'll grant you this. There's something mighty peculiar about a woman losing 3 husbands like that. Once is tragedy, twice is bad luck, but 3 times? 3 times is murder," someone muttered from the back of the room, and a hush fell over the gathered men. Outside, Ayanna continued her weekly pilgrimage to Murphy's General Store, seemingly oblivious to the eyes that followed her every move. She kept her head high, her movements deliberate and dignified. Years of whispers had built an invisible wall around her, one that kept the curious at bay and the superstitious at a safe distance. Inside Murphy's, old Dan Murphy himself served her with the nervous efficiency of a man handling dynamite. He'd been one of the few to show her any kindness when she'd first arrived in Cedar Ridge as James Morrison's bride, a young woman of barely 18 with hopes as bright as the desert sun. Now, 12 years later, he could barely meet her eyes. "The usual supplies, Mrs. Fletcher?" he asked, using her most recent married name out of habit. "Yes, Mr. Murphy, and a bag of flour, if you please." Her voice was soft, carrying the musical cadence of her people mixed with the precise English she'd learned at the mission school. It was a voice that rarely spoke anymore, worn down by years of defending herself against accusations both spoken and unspoken. As Dan prepared her order, young Tommy Henderson burst through the door, nearly knocking over a display of canned goods. "Mrs. Murphy! Mrs. Murphy! Come quick! There's been an accident at the Crawford Ranch." In the commotion that followed, no one noticed Ayanna quietly lifting the heavy flour sack, her slender frame straining under its weight. No one saw her struggle to balance it with her other supplies, and certainly no one offered to help. The walk back to her small adobe house on the outskirts of town was always the longest part of her day. The flour sack grew heavier with each step, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. She'd made this journey countless times, always alone, always observed but never assisted. The good Christian women of Cedar Ridge wouldn't risk their reputations by associating with her, and the men, well, the men were either too frightened or too mindful of their wives to offer aid. Her house sat apart from the others, a modest dwelling she'd inherited from Thomas Fletcher. It was surrounded by a small garden where she grew herbs and vegetables, the only green things that seemed to thrive under her care. The townspeople said even her garden was unnatural. How else could she grow such plants in the desert? They didn't know about the hours she spent hauling water from the well, or the careful tending that went into each plant. As she set down her burden at her gate, Ayanna allowed herself a moment of weakness, rubbing her aching shoulders. The black dress, heavy with dust and sorrow, clung to her frame. She'd been wearing mourning clothes for so long now that she'd forgotten what it felt like to dress in color. First for James, then Billy, then Thomas. The periods of mourning had blended together until black became her only identity. Inside her house, the silence was absolute. No children's laughter, no husband's footsteps, no family to fill the empty spaces, just her and the memories that haunted every corner. On the mantel sat 3 photographs, each man captured in sepia tones, their faces frozen in time. James with his military bearing and kind eyes, Billy with his devil-may-care grin and dreams of gold, Thomas, older and more serious, who'd promised her a new life away from the territory. All gone, all leaving her more alone than before. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, Ayanna sat by her window, watching the town light up for the evening. She could see the warm glow of family dinners, hear the distant sound of laughter from the saloon, observe the couples strolling arm in arm down Main Street, a world she was no longer part of, if she ever truly had been. In the distance, a lone rider approached town, his silhouette dark against the dying light. She watched with idle curiosity as he made his way down Main Street, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. Strangers were common enough in Cedar Ridge cowboys, merchants, traveling preachers, men running from something or towards something else. But this rider was different. He didn't head for the saloon or the hotel. Instead, he stopped at Murphy's, tying his horse to the post with the economical movements of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the practical clothes of a working rancher rather than the flashy garb of a gunslinger or the neat suit of a businessman. Ayanna turned away from the window. Another stranger in town meant nothing to her. Men came and went in Cedar Ridge like tumbleweeds, and she'd learned long ago that hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. She lit her lamp and prepared her solitary dinner, the shadows dancing on the walls like the ghosts of the life she might have had. Outside, the first stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that echoed the emptiness in her heart. The widow in black closed her curtains against the night, unaware that tomorrow would bring a change to her carefully ordered existence, a disruption in the form of a man who saw not a curse or a mystery, but simply a woman in need of help. The town of Cedar Ridge settled into its evening routines, the saloon growing rowdy, the respectable folks retiring behind closed doors, and at the edge of it all, Ayanna's house stood like a monument to sorrow, waiting for the dawn that would bring with it the first small crack in the wall of her isolation. The morning sun had barely crested the red rocks when Ayanna made her weekly journey to Murphy's General Store. The Tuesday routine never varied. Arrive early before the streets filled with judgmental eyes, purchase necessities, and return home by the least populated route. But this morning, as she struggled to lift a 50-pound sack of flour onto her shoulder, her carefully maintained solitude was interrupted. "Allow me, ma'am." The voice was deep, weathered by sun and wind. carrying neither the forced politeness of fear nor the oily charm of men with ulterior motives. Ayanna turned to find the stranger she'd glimpsed the previous evening, a man perhaps 45 years old, with silver threading through dark hair and lines around gray eyes that spoke of years squinting into desert sun. "I can manage," she said automatically, the response born of 5 years of self-reliance. "I'm sure you can," he replied, already lifting the sack with easy strength. "But there's no sense in it when I'm standing right here with 2 good arms and nothing pressing to do." For a moment, Ayanna stood frozen. No one in Cedar Ridge had offered her unsolicited help since Thomas disappeared. She studied the stranger's face, searching for the familiar signs of superstitious fear or predatory interest, but found only patient kindness. "My wagon's just outside," he continued, hoisting the flour sack. "Least I can do is drive you and your supplies home. Name's John McKenna. I've got the Bar J Ranch about 15 miles north of here." Ayanna had heard of the Bar J, a modest but well-run cattle operation that had been abandoned for nearly a decade before someone bought it sight unseen 2 years ago. The townspeople occasionally mentioned its owner, though she'd paid little attention to their gossip. They said he was peculiar, a man who preferred the company of cattle and horses to people, who came to town only when absolutely necessary. "I live at the edge of town," she said carefully. "People will talk." John McKenna shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both understanding and dismissal of town gossip. "People always talk. Doesn't mean I have to listen." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Though I understand if you'd rather not give them more ammunition. I can just carry this to your gate if you prefer." The simple acknowledgement of her situation, neither denying it nor dwelling on it, decided her. The wagon would be appreciated. "Thank you, Mr. McKenna." As they loaded her supplies, Dan Murphy watched from behind his counter with barely concealed amazement. John McKenna seemed oblivious to the store owner's scrutiny, focusing instead on securing the goods properly. But when he helped Ayanna onto the wagon seat, his hand lingering just a moment to ensure her balance, he looked her directly in the eyes and said, "That's a beautiful shawl, ma'am. The pattern work is exquisite." Ayanna's hand went unconsciously to the black Spanish shawl draped over her shoulders, one of the few fine things she'd kept from her marriage to Thomas. But it wasn't the compliment about the garment that made her breath catch. It was what he'd said, the word he'd used. Gorgeous. Not the shawl. Her. She saw it in his eyes, the frank appreciation of a man who saw a woman. Not a widow, not a curse, not a cautionary tale. For the first time in 5 years. Ayanna felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the morning sun. The ride to her house was conducted mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. John drove with the easy competence of long practice, his hands steady on the reins. Ayanna found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders, the patient set of his jaw, the crow's feet that deepened when he squinted against the sun. "Been in the territory long?" he asked as they turned onto the narrow path leading to her house. 12 years, she replied. "Since I was 18. Come out with your family." "No, with my first husband." The words felt strange on her tongue. She rarely spoke of James or the others. John nodded, but didn't press for details. "I've been here 2 years myself. Came out from Kansas after..." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "After I buried my wife, pneumonia took her, along with our daughter. Figured I needed a change of scenery." The casual revelation of his own loss shifted something between them. Ayanna looked at him with new understanding. Here was someone who knew the weight of grief, the way it settled into your bones and changed the very air you breathed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "As am I for your losses," he replied. "Though I imagine you're tired of hearing that." "Most people don't say it," Ayanna admitted. "They're too busy crossing themselves and hurrying past." John's laugh was short and without humor. "Fear makes fools of people. They'd rather believe in curses than admit that sometimes life is just hard and unfair." They'd reached her gate, and John climbed down to unload her supplies. Ayanna watched him work, efficient and methodical, stacking everything neatly by her door. When he finished, he stood awkwardly for a moment, hat in hand. "I come to town most Tuesdays for supplies," he said. "If you'd like, I could make a habit of stopping by Murphy's around the same time, save you hauling heavy loads." The offer hung between them, weighted with more than simple neighborly assistance. Ayanna knew accepting would invite speculation, would add fuel to the gossip that already surrounded her like smoke. But the prospect of traveling her weekly path with someone who looked at her without fear or superstition, "That would be kind," she heard herself say. "Thank you, Mr. McKenna." "John," he corrected gently. "And might I know your name? Your real name, not what the town calls you." "Ayanna," she said, the sound of it on her own lips almost foreign after years of being addressed only by her married names, or not at all. "Ayanna," he repeated, and somehow he made it sound like music. "Until the next Tuesday, then." She watched him drive away, dust swirling in the wagon's wake, and for the first time in years, found herself looking forward to something. The news of John McKenna's kindness to the widow in black spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire in dry grass. By evening, the Sunset Saloon buzzed with speculation. "McKenna's always been odd," declared Jake Harrison, a neighboring rancher. "Keeps to himself, doesn't drink, doesn't play cards. Now we know why. He's got a taste for the exotic." "More like a death wish," Pete Garrison added, already 3 whiskeys into his evening. "That woman's buried 3 husbands. McKenna'll be number 4. Mark my words." Samuel Cooper, the blacksmith, set down his beer with a heavy thud. "John McKenna's a good man. Pays fair, works hard, minds his own business. Maybe the rest of us should try that last part." But the damage was done. The story grew with each telling. By some accounts, John had been seen entering Ayanna's house. He hadn't. By others, she'd smiled at him like a temptress. She'd barely managed a nod. The most elaborate version had her casting Apache love spells while he watched, entranced. Eleanor Patterson held court in her parlor, surrounded by the town's respectable women. "I always knew there was something off about that McKenna," she pronounced. "No normal man lives alone like that, avoiding Christian society. And now, consorting with that creature." "Perhaps he's just being kind," Sarah Mackenzie suggested timidly. "The Bible does say to help widows and orphans." Eleanor's glare could have curdled milk. "The Bible also warns against yoking yourself to unbelievers. That woman practices heathen rituals. Sarah, Apache witchcraft. Why else would 3 healthy men die in her care?" Meanwhile, John McKenna remained blissfully unaware of the storm he'd created. He spent the week as he always did, tending his cattle, mending fences, and working the land with the single-minded focus that had helped him survive his own grief. But when Tuesday morning came again, he rose earlier than usual, took extra care with his appearance, and hitched his best horses to the wagon. He found Ayanna already at Murphy's, earlier than the previous week, as if she too had been eager for this meeting. She wore the same black dress. He suspected she owned nothing else, but had pinned her hair up in a style that revealed the elegant line of her neck. "Good morning, Ayanna," he said, tipping his hat. "Good morning, John." Dan Murphy watched them with worried eyes as John loaded her supplies. When Ayanna stepped outside to wait by the wagon, the old shopkeeper pulled John aside. "McKenna, you seem like a decent sort," he whispered urgently. "So I'm going to give you some advice. That woman, there's things about her you don't know, things that would make a wise man think twice." John's gray eyes hardened. "I know she's a widow 3 times over. I know this town has made her life a misery with gossip and superstition. And I know she needs help with her supplies. That's all that matters to me. Murphy." Outside, Ayanna pretended not to notice the lengthy conversation, though she could guess its content. When John emerged, his jaw set in a way that suggested the discussion hadn't been pleasant. She almost told him he didn't need to continue this arrangement, but something in his eyes, a determination mixed with gentleness, kept her silent. As they drove toward her house, John seemed to come to a decision. "Would you mind if we took the long way? There's something I'd like to show you." curiosity overcoming caution. Ayanna nodded. John turned the wagon north, following a trail that wound through stands of juniper and piñón pine. The landscape opened up into a valley she'd never seen before, where a creek ran clear and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt. "This is part of my land," John said, stopping the wagon beside the water. "I come here when town gets too loud with other people's opinions." He helped her down from the wagon, and they stood together by the creek, watching the water dance over smooth stones. The silence between them was different here, not the awkward quiet of strangers, but the peaceful communion of two people who understood that words weren't always necessary. "They warned you about me," Ayanna said finally. It wasn't a question. "They tried," John acknowledged. He picked up a flat stone and sent it skipping across a deeper pool. "Seems like everyone in Cedar Ridge has an opinion about you. Funny thing is, not one of them actually knows you." "And you think you do?" He turned to face her fully. "I know you tend a garden that everyone says shouldn't grow. I know you carry yourself with dignity despite years of cruelty. I know you've survived losses that would break most people, and I know you're the most beautiful woman I've seen in the territory, though that black dress tries hard to hide it." The words hung in the air between them, honest and dangerous. Ayanna felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. This man, with his quiet strength and kind eyes, was offering something she'd thought lost forever: the possibility of being seen as herself, not as a symbol of fear or a cautionary tale, but with that possibility came terror. 3 times she'd loved, 3 times she'd buried. The town might be wrong about the cause, but the result was the same. Death seemed to follow her like a faithful dog. "You should listen to them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Being near me, it doesn't end well." John was quiet for a long moment, then slowly reached out to take her hand. His fingers were calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe you've just had more than your share of sorrow. Either way, I'd rather take my chances with you than live safe and alone." Ayanna looked down at their joined hands, his sun-bronzed and scarred, hers the color of desert sand, and felt something she'd thought dead stir in her chest. Hope, fragile as a new shoot in spring, dangerous as a summer storm. She didn't pull her hand away. The whispers started as a trickle and swelled to a flood. Within days of John McKenna's second Tuesday trip with Ayanna, Cedar Ridge buzzed with scandal. The town had found fresh meat for its gossip mill, and it ground away with vicious efficiency. In the Sunset Saloon, the story evolved with each telling. Pete Garrison, now the self-appointed expert on the matter, held court at the bar. "Saw them with my own eyes," he slurred, though he'd been nowhere near Murphy's that morning. She had him looking at her like a man hypnotized. "Those Apache women, they know things, dark things." "The McKenna spread borders the old Apache burial grounds," added Carl Brennan, a drifter who'd been in town less than a month but spoke with the authority of a longtime resident. "Maybe that's how she got to him, spirits and such." Samuel Cooper slammed his hammer down on the bar, causing several men to jump. "Enough. John McKenna's lived here 2 years without bothering a soul. He pays his debts, helps his neighbors when asked, and keeps his word. That's more than I can say for most in this room." But the blacksmith's defense only fueled more speculation. By evening, theories abounded. Some said McKenna had lost his mind from grief over his dead wife and daughter. Others suggested Ayanna had bewitched him with Apache magic, using herbs from her unnatural garden. The most creative gossips wove elaborate tales of midnight rituals and blood pacts. Eleanor Patterson hosted an emergency meeting of the Ladies' Temperance Society, though temperance was the last thing on anyone's mind. "We have a Christian duty," she announced to the gathered women, "to save that poor man from the clutches of that Jezebel." "But what can we do?" asked Martha Williams, the pastor's wife. "Mr. McKenna seems quite set on helping her." "Then we must make him see reason." Eleanor declared, "Sarah, your husband does business with McKenna. Have him speak sense to the man. Martha, perhaps Reverend Williams could pay a pastoral visit. We cannot stand by while a decent Christian man falls prey to heathen influences. Sarah Mackenzie shifted uncomfortably. She'd seen the way John McKenna looked at Ayanna, not with the glazed eyes of enchantment, but with the clear gaze of a man who'd found something worth looking at. But she kept this observation to herself. Meanwhile, at the Bar J Ranch, John McKenna went about his evening chores unaware of the storm brewing in town. His mind, however, wasn't on cattle or fences. It was on a pair of brown eyes that held depths of sadness, on a smile so rare it felt like finding gold, on the way Ayanna's hand had felt in his, small but strong, trembling but not pulling away. He'd been alone for 3 years now, ever since Mary and little Emma had died. The consumption had taken them within days of each other, leaving him hollowed out like a tree struck by lightning. He'd sold the farm in Kansas, unable to bear the memories that clung to every corner, and come west seeking, what? Not forgetfulness. He never wanted to forget Mary's laugh or Emma's stubborn chin, but perhaps a place where the memories could settle into something bearable. The Bar J had offered that, hard work from dawn to dusk, the simple needs of cattle and horses, the vast silence of the desert, all had helped scab over the wounds. He'd thought himself content with solitude, maybe even deserving of it. Then he'd seen Ayanna struggling with that flour sack, proud and alone, and something in his chest had shifted. He understood what the town saw, a woman marked by tragedy, foreign in her ways, dangerous in her difference. But he saw what they missed, the quiet strength, the dignity maintained against all odds, the way she tended her garden like each plant was a small act of defiance against those who'd have her wither away. And Lord help him, she was beautiful. Not in the pale, delicate way townfolk seemed to prize, but in something deeper, the grace of her movements, the music of her accent, the way sorrow had refined rather than broken her features. The next Tuesday came with storm clouds building over the mountains, matching the tempest in Cedar Ridge. John arrived at Murphy's to find a delegation waiting, Reverend Williams, Harold Patterson from the bank, and Jake Harrison representing the Cattlemen's Association. "Morning, gentlemen," John said evenly, though he could guess their purpose. "John," Reverend Williams began in his sermon voice, "we've come as concerned friends and neighbors. This association you formed with the Fletcher woman, Mrs. Ayanna," John corrected. "And it's no association. I'm helping a neighbor with supplies." Harold Patterson stepped forward, his banker's smile as false as fool's gold. "Now, John, you're a businessman. Surely you understand that appearances matter. Your kindness to this woman reflects on all of us. The Bar J has contracts with several town businesses. It would be unfortunate if what, Harold?" John's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "If you had to explain to your wife why you're threatening a man for showing Christian charity?" Jake Harrison, less subtle than the others, spat tobacco juice and growled. "That woman's cursed. McKenna, 3 dead husbands ain't natural. You keep company with her, you'll be the 4th. John looked at each man in turn, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. "Gentlemen, I've buried a wife and child. I've seen real grief, real loss. That woman has survived more sorrow than any of you can imagine. And instead of offering comfort, you've made her a pariah. You want to know what's unnatural? It's not her, it's the cruelty of people who call themselves Christians while casting stones." He pushed past them into the store, where Dan Murphy waited nervously and Ayanna stood frozen by the counter. Having heard every word, her face was composed, but John saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her basket. "Morning, Ayanna," he said gently. "Looks like rain coming. We'd best load up quick." She nodded, not trusting her voice. As they worked together gathering her supplies, she was acutely aware of the men still gathered outside, of Dan Murphy's worried glances, of the weight of the town's judgment pressing down like the approaching storm. In the wagon, as they pulled away from the store, Ayanna finally spoke. "They threatened your business." "Let them try," John replied. "I've got contracts in Phoenix and Tucson, too. Cedar Ridge needs me more than I need them. You don't understand, she insisted. The things they say, the stories they tell, they'll make your life a misery. Ayanna. He stopped the wagon and turned to face her fully. I spent 3 years in Kansas after Mary died, surrounded by people who meant well. They brought casseroles and condolences, tried to match me with their sisters and cousins, told me time would heal everything. You know what? Their kindness was harder to bear than cruelty would have been. Because it came with expectations, they wanted me to grieve properly, to heal on their schedule, to become the man I was before. He gestured toward town. These folks, they're doing me a favor, showing their true colors. I'd rather face their honest hatred than false sympathy any day. The first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and cold. John urged the horses to a faster pace, but before they reached Ayanna's house, the sky opened in earnest. They were both soaked by the time he pulled up to her door. Come in, Ayanna said impulsively. You'll catch your death driving home in this. It was the first time she'd invited anyone into her home since Thomas had disappeared. John hesitated, knowing that if anyone saw him enter, the gossip would explode beyond containment. Then thunder crashed overhead, making the decision for him. Ayanna's house was small but meticulously clean, with touches that spoke of her heritage, a beautiful woven blanket on the wall, pottery in the Apache style, herbs hanging to dry by the window. But what drew John's attention were the photographs on the mantel. Your husband's? He asked gently. She nodded, burying herself with making coffee. James, Billy, Thomas. She paused, then added quietly. The town thinks I killed them. Did you? The question was asked so simply, without accusation or judgment, that Ayanna found herself answering with equal directness. No. James was killed by claim jumpers who wanted our land grant. The Army said Apache raiders. But I knew better. The wounds were from Army rifles. Billy. Her voice caught. Billy drank too much, gambled too much. He went looking for gold in places he shouldn't have. The snake was probably the kindest death waiting for him out there. And Thomas, she set down the coffee pot, her hands shaking slightly. Thomas was older, settled. He promised safety, respectability, but he had debts I didn't know about, enemies from back east. When they came calling, he rode out into that sandstorm rather than face them. I think he meant to come back when things cooled down, but the desert doesn't forgive poor planning. John listened without interrupting, then said quietly, So you've been widowed by greed, foolishness, and cowardice. None of that was your doing. Tell that to the town, Ayanna said bitterly. An Apache woman with 3 dead white husbands? They'd already written the story before Thomas's dust settled. The rain drummed against the windows as they sat with their coffee, the first people to share Ayanna's table in 2 years. John studied her in the lamplight, seeing new lines of pain in her face, but also a strength that humbled him. Why help me? She asked suddenly. You could have any woman in the territory. White women, respectable women, women who don't come with curses and gossip. John was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. After Mary died, I thought I'd never want to be close to anyone again. The risk seemed too high, the potential for pain too great. But living like that, it's not living. It's just existing. When I saw you that first Tuesday, proud and alone and still standing despite everything, I recognized something. What? A fellow survivor, he said simply. Someone who knows that the worst can happen, has happened, and yet still gets up each morning, still tends a garden, still walks through town with dignity, even when they treat you like a ghost. Ayanna felt tears threaten for the first time in years. I'm tired of being strong, she whispered. Then don't be. John said, Not all the time, not with me. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the desert washed clean and smelling of sage. As John prepared to leave, Ayanna touched his arm. They'll say you were here. They'll say let them say it. John replied, I've been thinking. Would you like to learn to ride? I've got a gentle mare who needs exercise. We could meet out at the creek, away from prying eyes. Just two neighbors enjoying the territory. For the first time since he'd met her, Ayanna smiled, not the careful, guarded expression she sometimes allowed, but a real smile that transformed her face. I'd like that. As John drove home through the rain-washed evening, he knew the battle lines had been drawn. The town would not give up their favorite target easily, but for the first time in 3 years, he had something worth fighting for. And if Cedar Ridge wanted a war over the right to show kindness to a grieving woman, well, they'd picked the wrong man to threaten. Behind him, Ayanna stood at her window, watching his wagon disappear into the distance. The coffee cup still sat on her table, proof that the afternoon hadn't been a dream, for the first time in 5 years. Her house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like what it was, a shelter from the storm, made warmer by the presence of someone who saw her not as the widow in black, but simply as Ayanna. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm as steady as heartbeat. Tuesdays remained their public day, John helping with supplies while the town watched and whispered. But Thursdays and Sundays became their secret, when Ayanna would walk the desert path to the creek and find John waiting with 2 horses, his smile as warm as the morning sun. "You're a natural," John said one Thursday as Ayanna guided the mare through a stand of mesquite. She sat the horse with an easy grace that had come quickly, as if her body remembered skills from a childhood before mission schools and white husbands. "My grandmother would be proud," Ayanna replied, patting the mare's neck. "She used to say Apache women were born to ride. I thought I'd forgotten." "You don't forget who you are," John said. "You just sometimes need reminding." These stolen hours became the brightest spots in Ayanna's carefully ordered life. Away from town, from watching eyes and wagging tongues, she could simply be. John never pressed for more than she offered. A smile here, a shared story there, the occasional brush of hands as he helped her mount or dismount. But slowly, like spring water seeping through rock, warmth began to flow between them. They talked during those rides, sharing pieces of themselves like traders exchanging goods. John spoke of his childhood in Missouri, of meeting Mary at a church social, of Emma's birth and the dreams they'd had of more children. Ayanna told him about the reservation, about being chosen for the mission school because of her quick mind, about the strange in-between world she'd inhabited ever since, too Apache for the whites, too white-educated for full acceptance by her people. "Is that why you married James?" John asked one afternoon as they rested the horses by the creek. "To find a place to belong?" Ayanna considered the question, tossing pebbles into the water. "Perhaps." He was kind, and he saw me as more than just an Apache girl to convert or conquer. He promised adventure, a life beyond the mission walls. I was young enough to believe promises meant something. "They do," John said quietly, "when the right person makes them." Their eyes met across the space between them, and Ayanna felt that dangerous hope flutter again in her chest. But with it came fear, cold and familiar. 3 times she'd trusted. 3 times she'd stood at grave sites. The town might be wrong about the how, but the what remained. Death seemed to follow her like a shadow. One Sunday in early December, they rode farther than usual, reaching a sheltered canyon where ancient petroglyphs marked the red rock walls. Ayanna dismounted and approached the symbols slowly, her fingers hovering just above the carved lines. "My people were here," she said softly. "Long before the Spanish, before the Americans. These stories," she traced a spiral pattern. "This one speaks of seasons turning, of life cycling through death and back to life again." John stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool winter air. "What does that one mean?" He pointed to a figure that seemed to be reaching toward a star. "Hope," Ayanna whispered. "Or foolishness. My grandmother said they were often the same thing." "Ayanna," John's voice was serious. "I need to tell you something, ask you something. Really." She turned to face him, seeing determination mixed with uncertainty in his gray eyes. "Christmas is coming," he continued. I usually spend it alone. But this year, would you consider joining me for dinner? Not in town," he added quickly. "At the ranch. Just us." The invitation hung between them, weighted with implications. To visit his home, to share a meal on the holiest of Christian holidays. It was a declaration of sorts, a line that, once crossed, would change everything. "John," she began, but he held up a hand. "I know what you're going to say, that it's dangerous to be close to you, that you've buried 3 husbands, that the town will talk." He took a breath. "I've thought about all of it, weighed the risks, and I've decided I'd rather have whatever time we're given than live safe and empty." "You don't understand," Ayanna said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "When James died, I thought my heart would stop. With Billy, I learned to guard it better, but it still nearly killed me. And Thomas, by then I thought I had nothing left to lose. But grief finds new ways to cut, even when you think you're hollow." "I do understand," John said gently. "When I lost Mary and Emma, I wanted to die too. Some nights I'd stand out on the prairie and dare lightning to strike me, but it didn't, and eventually I had to choose, keep breathing or stop. I kept breathing, and that led me here. To you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. "I'm not asking you to forget them. I'm not asking for promises or guarantees. I'm just asking you to share Christmas dinner with someone who sees you." Ayanna. Not the widow in black. Not a curse or a mystery. Just you. Ayanna closed her eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into his touch. When she opened them again, her decision was made. Yes. The single word seemed to release something in the air between them. John smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features, and Ayanna found herself smiling back. They rode home in companionable silence, but as they neared the place where their paths diverged, reality intruded. A rider was approaching fast from the direction of town, and John recognized Jake Harrison's distinctive palomino. "McKenna!" Harrison reined up hard, his horse dancing with agitation. "You need to get back to your ranch, now!" John's hand moved instinctively to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "What's happened? Fence cut on your south pasture?" "Cattle scattered hell to breakfast. Looks like about 30 head missing, maybe more. Rustlers." John's jaw tightened. It was too convenient. Happening while he was out riding with Ayanna. "When?" "Hands found it about an hour ago. I was in town. Heard the news. Figured you'd be..." Harrison's eyes flicked to Ayanna, then away. "Figured I'd find you out this way." "Thank you for letting me know," John said evenly. He turned to Ayanna. "I have to go." "Of course." She kept her voice steady, but he saw the worry in her eyes. They both knew this might not be random bad luck. As John spurred his horse toward home, Harrison lingered. "You should stay away from him," he told Ayanna. "This is just the beginning. There's talk in town, ugly talk. Some folks think the only way to save McKenna is to remove the temptation." Ayanna's spine straightened. "Is that a threat, Mr. Harrison?" "A warning. You've buried 3 men already. Don't make McKenna the 4th. He rode off before she could respond, leaving Ayanna alone with the gathering dusk and a cold dread settling in her stomach. She'd known the town wouldn't accept John's friendship with her, but she'd underestimated how far they might go to prevent it. At the bar, John found chaos. His scattered cattle had trampled through neighbors' fields, causing damage that would cost money and goodwill to repair. The missing cattle were likely halfway to Mexico by now. A significant financial loss for an operation the size of his, but what made his blood run cold was what his foreman, Dutch Stevens, showed him at the cut fence. "Look here, boss." Dutch pointed to marks in the dirt. "These ain't regular rustler tracks. Too organized. And see this?" He held up a piece of fabric caught on the barbed wire. "That's from a town coat, not range clothes." The implication was clear. This wasn't random rustling. It was a message. Stop seeing the Apache widow, or worse will follow. Double the night watches. John ordered, And send word to the sheriff in Tucson. I want this on record." "You think he'll do anything?" Dutch asked skeptically. "No, but I want it known that I followed proper channels. When I handle this myself, I want my conscience clear." That night, John sat on his porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. He thought about Ayanna, alone in her house at the edge of town, vulnerable to whatever vindictiveness Cedar Ridge might dream up. He thought about his promise of Christmas dinner, wondering if he'd just painted a target on both their backs. But he also remembered her smile by the petroglyphs, the way she'd said yes like it was a prayer. He'd meant what he told her. He'd rather face danger with her than safety alone. The good people of Cedar Ridge had made their move. Now it was his turn. In town, Ayanna sat by her window, her grandmother's old hunting knife in her lap. She'd heard horses earlier, circling her property but coming no closer, testing, perhaps, or warning. She didn't light any lamps, preferring the darkness that had once been her enemy but now felt like armor. She thought about John, about the cattle and the cut fences, about Jake Harrison's warning. The town had tolerated her as long as she kept to her assigned role, the cursed widow. Alone and untouchable. But John had upset that balance, had dared to see her as human, and now they would both pay the price, unless she ended it. The thought came unbidden but persistent. She could refuse to see him again, could return to her isolation, could save him from whatever fate the town had planned. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But as she fingered the ancient knife, Ayanna realized she was tired of being smart and safe, tired of living as a ghost to appease the fears of others. John had offered her something she'd thought lost forever, not just companionship, but the possibility of being truly seen and accepted. Was that not worth fighting for? Outside, a coyote howled, and others answered, their chorus wild and free. Ayanna listened and made her choice. If Cedar Ridge wanted a fight, they would get one. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone. The winter moon rose over the desert, casting shadows across two houses miles apart, where two people sat awake, thinking of each other and of the storm that was surely coming. But for the first time in years, neither felt entirely alone in the darkness. The summer storm arrived with a sudden violence typical of the desert, turning the afternoon sky from brass to black in minutes. Ayanna had been working in her garden when the first fat drops fell, and by the time she reached her door, the rain had become a solid wall of water. She stood at her window, watching the deluge transform the dusty ground into rushing streams when she heard it, a groaning, splintering sound from above. Years of patching and repatching had finally taken their toll. The roof beam over her main room split with a crack like gunfire. Water poured through the growing gap, soaking her few possessions, turning her neat home into chaos. Ayanna grabbed what she could, the photographs from the mantel, her grandmother's blanket, important papers, but the damage was spreading faster than she could save things. By the time the storm passed, leaving the desert washed and steaming, half her roof had collapsed. Ayanna stood in the ruins of her home, water dripping from her hair, and felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside. It wasn't hysteria, exactly, but a kind of dark amusement at the universe's timing, just when she'd begun to hope again, to believe she might escape her isolation. Even her shelter was taken away. She was still standing there, surveying the damage, when she heard horses approaching. John appeared around the corner of the house, having come for their Thursday ride, and pulled up short at the sight. "Good Lord," he breathed, taking in the collapsed roof, the sodden interior visible through the gaps. "Are you hurt?" "No," Ayanna said, surprised by how calm she sounded. "Just wet and temporarily homeless, it seems." John dismounted and picked his way through the debris to her side. "This is more than storm damage," he said, examining the broken beams. "These have been cut. See? Saw marks. Weathered but clear. Someone weakened your roof structure." Ayanna nodded. She'd suspected as much, but hadn't wanted to voice it. "It doesn't matter now. What's done is done." "The hell it doesn't matter." John's voice was hard as granite. First my cattle, now this. They're escalating. Yes. Ayanna agreed simply. The question is, what to do about it? John turned to face her fully. You'll come to the ranch. No arguments. You can't stay here, and I've got plenty of room. John, that would only make them matter? Good. Let them stew in it. He gestured at the ruined house. They've already crossed every line of decency. You think staying here, vulnerable and alone, will make them back off? It'll only embolden them. Ayanna looked at her destroyed home, at the life she'd carefully built in isolation crumbling like the adobe walls. Then she looked at John, solid and sure, and offering not just shelter but defiance against those who would see her broken. All right, she said, but only until I can make other arrangements. We'll see about that. John muttered. Already planning, they salvaged what they could from the house, loading her few undamaged possessions onto a pack horse. As they worked, Ayanna found the wooden box she'd hidden beneath loose floorboards, the one containing memories she'd never shared with anyone. John noticed her careful handling of it. Important. Letters, she said quietly. Documents. Truth. If anyone cared to look. May I? He asked gently. Ayanna hesitated, then handed him the box. As he opened it, she turned away, unable to watch as he discovered the reality of her 3 marriages. John read in silence. James's letters to his family describing the threats from men who wanted their land grant. His fear for Ayanna's safety if something happened to him. Military reports confirming he'd been shot with Army-issue rifles, not Apache weapons. Billy's gambling markers. IOUs from dangerous men. His own drunken scrawls about striking it rich and finally being worthy of his beautiful wife. A Pinkerton report about Thomas Fletcher's embezzlement from his previous business partners. Men who'd tracked him to Arizona and wanted their money. My God, John said finally. You've been carrying proof of your innocence all this time. Why didn't you show anyone? Ayanna's laugh was bitter. Show who? The town that had already convicted me. They didn't want truth. John, they wanted a story that confirmed what they already believed. That Apache women are dangerous, that mixing races brings death, that I was something to fear and shun. We'll make them see, John said fiercely. We'll take these to the sheriff, to the newspaper. No, Ayanna touched his arm. It won't matter. Those who want to believe will find ways to doubt. Those who might listen are too afraid of their neighbors to speak up. I've made my peace with it. Well, I haven't, John growled, but he carefully replaced the documents and handed the box back. The ride to the Bar J was quiet, each lost in thought. As they approached the ranch buildings, Ayanna saw several of John's hands pause in their work to stare. She straightened in the saddle, lifting her chin. If she was going to do this, she'd do it with dignity. Boys, John called out as they rode into the yard. Mrs. Ayanna's house was damaged in the storm. She'll be staying in the guest house until repairs can be made. I expect you to treat her with the same respect you'd show any guest. That clear? Dutch Stevens, the foreman, was the first to respond. Clear as day, boss, ma'am. He touched his hat to Ayanna, and slowly the other hands followed suit. The guest house was small but comfortable, originally built for a foreman's family that had never materialized. It sat a respectable distance from the main house, with its own kitchen and necessary facilities. As John helped her settle in, Ayanna was struck by the careful way he maintained propriety even while defying convention. I'll have Maria come by, he said, referring to the Mexican woman who cooked and cleaned for the ranch. She'll help you get settled. And Ayanna, he paused at the door. This doesn't change anything about Christmas dinner. If anything, it'll be more convenient. After he left, Ayanna sat on the narrow bed and tried to process the sudden shift in her world. This morning she'd been the widow in black, isolated but independent. Now she was under John McKenna's protection, a move that would send shockwaves through Cedar Ridge. The shockwaves came faster than expected. By evening, a delegation arrived at the ranch. Reverend Williams, Harold Patterson, Eleanor Patterson, and several other town notables. John met them on the main house porch, his rifle prominently displayed against the wall. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said coolly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Reverend Williams, elected spokesperson, cleared his throat. "John, we've come about the situation, the Apache woman." "Mrs. Ayanna," John corrected, as he always did. "Yes, well, we've heard she's taken residence here. Surely you can see how inappropriate." "What I see," John interrupted, "is a woman whose home was sabotaged and destroyed. What I see is Christian neighbors who should be offering aid instead standing on my porch clutching their pearls. What I see is hypocrisy dressed up as concern." Eleanor Patterson stepped forward, her face pinched with disapproval. "That woman is a danger to this entire community. 3 husbands dead, and now she's ensnared you. We're trying to save you. Mr. McKenna." "Save me?" John laughed, but there was no humor in it. "From what? From showing basic human decency? From refusing to participate in your campaign of persecution?" He reached behind him and picked up the wooden box Ayanna had entrusted to him. "Would you like to know how her husbands really died? Because I have proof right here. Documents, letters, evidence that she's been nothing but a victim of circumstances and your collective cruelty." "Lies," someone muttered from the back of the group. "Apache witchcraft." John's face darkened. "Get off my land, all of you, and spread the word. Anyone who threatens or harms Mrs. Ayanna will answer to me. Anyone who cut my fences or weakened her roof beams should know I've hired Pinkerton detectives to investigate. The territory is getting civilized, whether Cedar Ridge likes it or not. Law reaches here now." "You're making a mistake," Harold Patterson warned. "The bank holds your mortgage. McKenna, business relationships can be reconsidered." "Try it," John said flatly. "I'll wire every newspaper from here to San Francisco about a bank that forecloses on customers who show kindness to widows. See how that plays with your investors." The delegation retreated, but the battle lines were now clearly drawn. From her window in the guest house, Ayanna watched them go, her heart heavy with the trouble she'd brought to John's door. That evening, he knocked on her door with a dinner tray. "Thought you might not want to eat with the hands tonight," he said. "Give everyone time to adjust." They ate together on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The silence between them was comfortable, but Ayanna could see the tension in John's shoulders, the way his eyes kept scanning the horizon. "I should leave," she said quietly. "Go to Phoenix, maybe California. Start over where no one knows me." "Is that what you want?" She considered lying, making it easier for both of them, but she'd had enough of lies. Enough of hiding. "No, I want to stay. I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to see where this leads. With you, but not at the cost of everything you've built here." John reached across the small table and took her hand. "I built this place as a refuge from grief, but a refuge can become a prison if you're not careful. You've woken me up. Ayanna made me remember there's more to life than just surviving. That's worth any cost. Even your ranch, your reputation. The ranch is just land and cattle. It can be rebuilt anywhere. And reputation?" He squeezed her hand gently. "I'd rather be known as the man who stood by you than the man who bowed to the mob." Ayanna felt tears threaten again. When had she become so given to emotion? The years of stoic endurance seemed to be cracking like a dam under spring flood. "Hey," John said softly. "No tears. We're tougher than they are. We've both survived worse than anything Cedar Ridge can throw at us." "Have we?" Ayanna asked. "You lost your family to illness. I lost my husbands to violence and greed. But this is people choosing to be cruel. Somehow that seems harder to bear." "Then we bear it together," John said simply. "That's the difference now. Neither of us is alone anymore." As if to underscore his words, Dutch Stevens appeared around the corner. "Boss, riders coming. About a dozen, looks like—" John was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Ayanna, inside." But she stood with him. "No. If they've come for me, I'll face them." The riders emerged from the growing darkness, and John recognized most of them. Young men from town, liquored up and looking for trouble. They stopped just outside rifle range, their leader, Carl Brennan, shouting across the distance, "Send out the witch, McKenna! She's cursed this whole valley long enough!" John chambered around, the sound carrying clearly in the still air. "First man sets foot on my property, uninvited gets a bullet. That's not a threat. Boys, that's a promise." "You can't protect her forever," someone else yelled. "She'll be the death of you, just like the others." "Maybe," John called back, "but it'll be my choice. Can any of you say the same? Or are you all just Eleanor Patterson's puppets, dancing when she pulls your strings?" The insult hit home. Several riders shifted uncomfortably. In a town like Cedar Ridge, being called a woman's puppet was worse than being called a coward. Dutch and several other ranch hands had materialized from the shadows, all armed. The math had shifted, and the mob knew it. "This isn't over, McKenna!" Brennan shouted, but he was already turning his horse. "No," John agreed. "But it is for tonight. Get going, before someone does something that can't be undone." The riders retreated, but their dust had barely settled before John was giving orders. "Double the watch. No one rides alone. And Dutch, send word to those Pinkertons. I want them here yesterday." As the hands dispersed, John turned to find Ayanna still standing beside him, her grandmother's knife in her hand. He hadn't even seen her draw it. "You would have fought," he said, somewhere between a question and statement. "I've been fighting all my life," she replied. "The only difference is now I have something worth fighting for." Their eyes met in the darkness, and something shifted between them, subtle but profound. Without conscious thought, they moved closer, drawn by forces stronger than propriety or caution. "Ayanna," John breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle but insistent. Asking a question, she answered by melting into his embrace. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, John rested his forehead against hers. "I should apologize," he murmured. "That wasn't proper. You're under my protection." "John McKenna," Ayanna interrupted, a smile in her voice. "If you apologize for the first real kiss I've had in 5 years, I may have to use this knife after all." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest where she still rested against him. "Well, when you put it that way." But the moment of lightness couldn't last. They both knew the confrontation with the town was far from over. Tonight had been a probe, testing their defenses. The real assault was yet to come. "We should set a watch on the guest house," John said reluctantly, stepping back. "I wouldn't put it past them to try something while we're focused on the main buildings. Or," Ayanna said quietly, "I could stay in the main house, just for tonight, for security reasons." John went very still. "Ayanna, are you sure? If anyone sees, if word gets out—" "Let it," she said fiercely. "I'm tired of living by their rules, measuring my life by their judgments. If staying alive means staying close to you, then that's what I'll do." "Just for security," John repeated, but his eyes were warm. "Of course," Ayanna agreed, "just for security." As they walked together toward the main house, the stars beginning to emerge in the vast Arizona sky, neither acknowledged what they both knew, that after tonight there would be no going back. The town had forced their hand, pushed them together faster than either might have chosen, but perhaps that was fitting. In a land where survival often depended on quick decisions and trusted partners, they had found in each other what they needed most, someone worth taking the risk for. The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon, when Cedar Ridge traditionally gathered for market day. John and Ayanna had ridden into town together, a deliberate choice that sent ripples of shock through the crowd. She wore not her usual black but a deep blue dress John had ordered from Tucson, and her hair was pinned up in a style that emphasized her elegant neck and proud bearing. They'd come for supplies, and to demonstrate that they would not be driven into hiding. But as they approached Murphy's store, they found their way blocked by a crowd that seemed to encompass half the town. At its center stood Carl Brennan, drunk despite the early hour, his voice carrying across the square. "There she is, the Black Widow herself! How many men have to die before we stop her?" The crowd murmured agreement, their faces a mix of fear, anger, and the ugly excitement that comes from being part of a mob. John's hand moved to his sidearm, but Ayanna touched his wrist. "No," she said quietly. "This is my fight." She stepped forward, and the crowd instinctively moved back, even now, faced with their collective hatred. She carried herself with a dignity that made some of them look away. "You want the truth?" Ayanna's voice rang clear and strong. "Then you shall have it." From her bag, she produced the documents John had urged her to share. Letters, reports, evidence of her innocence. "My first husband, James Morrison, was murdered by land thieves. Here's the army report that was buried because it implicated white settlers, not Apache raiders." She held up the papers. "My second husband died of his own foolishness and drink, chasing gold in places no sane man goes. And my third fled his debts like a coward, riding into a storm rather than face his responsibilities." "Lies," someone shouted. "Apache tricks." "Then examine them yourself," Ayanna challenged, stepping toward the crowd. Several people stepped back as if she carried disease. "But you won't, will you? Because the truth doesn't fit the story you've told yourselves. It's easier to fear me than to admit you've been wrong." Eleanor Patterson pushed to the front, her face twisted with righteous fury. "How dare you stand there, flaunting your corruption of a good Christian man? Have you no shame?" "Shame?" Ayanna's laugh was sharp as glass. "For what? For surviving? For refusing to disappear simply because my existence makes you uncomfortable? You speak of Christian values while practicing cruelty that would make the devil blush. That's enough." The voice came from an unexpected source. Samuel Cooper, the blacksmith. He stepped out from the crowd to stand between Ayanna and the mob. "I've held my tongue too long, and I'm ashamed of it. This woman has done nothing but try to live her life in peace. We're the ones who should be ashamed." "Sam's right." Another voice. Sarah Mackenzie, defying her husband's grip on her arm. "I've watched this poison spread through our town for 5 years. It ends now." But Carl Brennan, emboldened by whiskey and wounded pride from the confrontation at the ranch, wasn't finished. "She's bewitched you all, just like she bewitched McKenna." He pulled a gun, waving it wildly. "Someone needs to—" The shot that rang out didn't come from Brennan. John's bullet caught the drunk man's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning into the dirt. Brennan fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding hand and howling. "Anyone else?" John asked calmly, his smoking Colt steady in his hand. "Because I've got 5 more bullets and a real short temper for men who threaten women." The silence that followed was profound. Then, from the back of the crowd, came slow, deliberate applause. A man in a dusty black suit stepped forward, one of the Pinkerton detectives John had hired. "Quite a show," the detective said dryly. "Mr. McKenna, Mrs. Ayanna, I've completed my investigation. Would the good people of Cedar Ridge like to hear what I've discovered?" The crowd, caught between curiosity and fear, remained frozen. The Pinkerton continued without waiting for permission. "The fence cutting at the Bar J was done with tools stolen from Henderson's hardware tools purchased by one Carl Brennan." He glanced at the wounded man. "The roof beams at Mrs. Ayanna's house were weakened over several weeks. Based on the weathering patterns, sawdust was found in the Pattersons' tool shed matching the wood." Eleanor Patterson's face went white. "That's preposterous. We would never—" "Your nephew Theodore was quite talkative after a few drinks in Tucson." The detective interrupted, seemed proud of his handiwork. Also mentioned something about his aunt promising him a share of the Fletcher property once the Apache witch was driven off. The revelations rippled through the crowd like a stone in still water. People began edging away from the Pattersons, the mob mentality cracking under the weight of exposed truth. "Furthermore," the Pinkerton continued, producing a leather folder, "I've verified every document Mrs. Ayanna showed you. They're genuine. She's been telling the truth all along." John holstered his gun and stepped forward. You all have a choice. Continue this persecution and face legal consequences. Yes, the law reaches even to Cedar Ridge now. Or you can remember what decent people do when they've wronged someone. You can make amends. For a long moment, the square was silent except for Brennan's moaning. Then Doc Henderson pushed through to tend the wounded man, muttering, "Fool boy had it coming." One by one, people began to disperse. Some slunk away in shame, others with defiance still burning in their eyes. But a surprising number approached Ayanna, offering quiet apologies or simply nods of acknowledgement. Sarah Mackenzie was among the last, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I knew it was wrong, but I was too cowardly to speak up. Can you forgive me?" Ayanna studied the younger woman, seeing genuine remorse. "We all do what we must to survive," she said quietly. "I understand fear better than most." As the square emptied, leaving only John, Ayanna, and the Pinkerton, Eleanor Patterson made one last stand. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You think you've won, but this town won't forget what you are." "No," Ayanna agreed calmly, "but perhaps they'll remember what you are. Mrs. Patterson. A woman so poisoned by hatred that she tried to destroy someone whose only crime was existing." Eleanor's face contorted, but her husband grabbed her arm, pulling her away. The threat of legal action had clearly made an impression on the banker. When they were gone, the Pinkerton tipped his hat. "I'll file my report with the territorial authorities. Doubt the Pattersons will face charges. Not enough direct evidence, but they'll think twice before trying anything else." "Thank you," John said, shaking the man's hand. "Send your bill to the ranch." "Already paid in full," the detective said with a slight smile. "Had an interesting conversation with an Army colonel who remembered Lieutenant Morrison. Seems he felt guilty about that buried report. Consider this his way of making amends." He paused. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Morrison's family back east asked me to give you this if I found you." He handed Ayanna a sealed letter, then touched his hat again and walked away. Ayanna stared at the letter, her hands trembling slightly. After all these years, James's family had reached out. She tucked it away to read later. In private. "You all right?" John asked softly. "I don't know," she admitted. "For so long, I've defined myself by their hatred. Now," she gestured at the empty square, "what am I without it?" "How about we find out?" John suggested, offering his arm, starting with loading those supplies and getting home. Home. The word settled around her like a warm shawl. Somewhere in the past weeks, the Bar J had become that, not just a refuge, but a home. As they loaded the wagon, Murphy appeared in his doorway. The old shopkeeper looked older, worn down by the day's events. "Mrs. Ayanna," he called hesitantly. "I owe you an apology. Many apologies. I knew better, but I let fear rule me. I'm sorry." Ayanna nodded acknowledgement. She couldn't offer forgiveness. Not yet. Some wounds were too deep for immediate healing. But it was a start. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both processing the dramatic shift in their world. The town's persecution hadn't ended. There would always be those who clung to their hatred, but its power was broken. Truth, backed by legal authority and a few brave voices, had finally cracked the wall of superstition. As they approached the ranch, Ayanna opened the letter from James's family. Her eyes misted as she read their words of sorrow for believing the worst, their gratitude that she'd survived, their hope that she'd found happiness. At the bottom, a postscript. "James wrote of you often. He said you were the strongest woman he'd ever met. We see now he was right." "Good news?" John asked, noticing her tears. "Absolution," she said softly. "From people I thought hated me. Seems to be the day for it," John observed. "Think you can handle one more surprise?" They'd reached the ranch, and Ayanna saw immediately what he meant. The guest house had been transformed. New curtains in the windows, fresh paint on the door, a garden plot already tilled and ready for planting. On the porch sat a rocking chair with a bright cushion, not black but red as sunset. "The hands have been busy," John said, trying for casual and missing by a mile. "They figured if you were staying, the place should feel more like, well, like yours." Dutch Stevens emerged from the barn, several other hands behind him. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat. "We wanted to say, what happened in town today? You standing up like that? Well, we're proud to have you here. All of us." The other men nodded agreement, some shyly, others with gruff approval. These men who'd initially viewed her with suspicion had become, without fanfare, her defenders. "Thank you," Ayanna managed through a tight throat. "All of you." As the hands dispersed, John walked her to the guest house porch. "There's one more thing," he said, producing a small package. "I ordered it weeks ago. Before everything, it arrived yesterday." Inside was a silver hair comb, delicately worked with a pattern of desert flowers. Not expensive, but chosen with care. Ayanna held it up to the fading light, seeing in its shine a future she'd never dared imagine. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Ayanna." John took her hands, his expression serious. "I know it's too soon. I know you've had enough of husbands and promises, but I need you to know I love you. Not despite your past, but because of how you've survived it. I love your strength, your dignity, your refusal to let them break you. I love—" She silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all the words she couldn't yet say. When they parted, she was crying and laughing simultaneously. "Is that a yes to something I haven't asked yet?" John asked, hope and humor mingling in his voice. "It's a maybe to everything." Ayanna said, "It's a let's see where tomorrow takes us. It's—" She paused, searching for words. "It's me choosing to live again, instead of just survive." "I can work with that," John said, pulling her close. "I'm a patient man." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ayanna stood in the circle of John's arms and felt something she'd thought lost forever. Peace. The town might never fully accept her. There would always be whispers and sideways glances, but she was no longer alone, no longer defined by loss and suspicion. She was Ayanna, not the widow in black, but a woman with a future as bright as the desert stars. And for the first time in 5 years, that was enough. The silver comb caught the last light of day as she tucked it into her hair, a small act of defiance against the darkness that had ruled her life for so long. Tomorrow, there would be challenges, the slow work of building trust and healing wounds. But tonight, there was just this, a man who saw her truly, a home that welcomed her, and the possibility of love strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. In the distance, a nightingale began its evening song, and Ayanna smiled. Even the desert, it seemed, was celebrating her resurrection. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert as John and Ayanna rode out from the ranch, their horses moving in easy synchronization. It had been 3 weeks since the confrontation in town, and while the dust hadn't entirely settled, a new rhythm had emerged in their lives. Today, they were heading to the valley John had shown her months ago, but with a different purpose. "You're sure about this?" John asked as they descended into the sheltered canyon where the creek ran clear. "I've never been more sure of anything," Ayanna replied, her hand touching the saddlebag that contained her past, the black dresses that had defined her for so long. They dismounted near a deep pool where the water gathered before continuing its journey through the desert. The spot was beautiful in its simplicity, cottonwoods providing shade, the soft sound of water over stone, the high canyon walls creating a natural cathedral. Ayanna unpacked the dresses carefully, laying them out on a flat rock. 3 dresses for 3 marriages, each one heavy with memory and sorrow. She ran her fingers over the fabric, remembering the woman who had worn them, young and hopeful with James, desperate for stability with Billy, resigned to loneliness with Thomas. "You don't have to do this," John said gently. "Burning them won't erase what happened." "No," Ayanna agreed, "but it will mark the end of mourning. I've worn black for 5 years. John, I've defined myself by loss for so long I'd forgotten there could be anything else." She looked up at him. "That woman, the widow in black, she served her purpose. She survived when I didn't think I could, but I don't need her anymore." From her pocket, She produced matches, one by one. She lit the dresses, watching as flames consumed the fabric. The smoke rose into the clear morning air, carrying with it years of grief, isolation, and the weight of others' fears. As the last of the black cloth turned to ash, Ayanna stood and walked to the pool's edge. She unpinned her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders, then bent to wash her face in the cold, clear water. When she straightened, John was there with a blanket to wrap around her shoulders. "Hello," he said softly, as if seeing her for the first time. "I'm John McKenna." Despite the emotions of the moment, Ayanna found herself smiling. "Ayanna," she replied, playing along. "Just Ayanna. Pleased to meet you. Just Ayanna," John said, his eyes warm with love and understanding. "Might I interest you in a ride? I know a ranch where they serve excellent coffee and the company is tolerable." "That sounds wonderful," she said, leaning into his solid presence. They sat together by the water for a while, watching the ashes disperse in the breeze. Finally, Ayanna spoke. "I want to build something." "What kind of something?" "A school," she said, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "For children like I was, caught between worlds. Apache children who need to learn English and writing to survive in the changing world, but without losing who they are. White children who need to learn that different doesn't mean dangerous." John considered this. "That's a big dream. The town won't make it easy." "When has easy ever been our path?" Ayanna asked. "But I think there are people who might support it now. Sarah Mackenzie, Samuel Cooper, even Doc Henderson mentioned his granddaughter needs schooling. We'd need a building, books, a teacher." "I can teach," Ayanna said. "I learned at the mission school, remember? And there's that old cabin on the eastern edge of your property. With some work, our property," John corrected. "And yes, with some work, it could serve." He paused, then added carefully, "Speaking of our, there's something I've been meaning to discuss." Ayanna turned to face him fully, seeing the nervousness in his usually steady demeanor. "John McKenna, are you about to propose to me beside the ashes of my widow's weeds?" "Would that be too morbid?" he asked, genuinely uncertain. "Actually," Ayanna said, surprising herself, "it seems rather perfect. The end of one life, the beginning of another." John took her hands in his. "I don't have a ring. Didn't plan this. But Ayanna, these past months with you have been the first time since Mary and Emma died that I've felt truly alive. Not just going through the motions, but actually living. You've brought color back to my world." "You've given me safety," Ayanna said softly. "Not just physical safety, but the safety to be myself, to be more than my tragedies." "So what do you say?" John asked. "Want to scandalize Cedar Ridge one more time? Give them something new to gossip about? The rancher who married the Apache widow for love instead of fear?" "Yes," Ayanna said simply. "Yes, to all of it. To you, to the school, to whatever comes next." John's kiss was answer enough, full of promise and passion and the quiet joy of two people who'd found each other against all odds. When they finally returned to the ranch, Dutch Stevens was waiting with a knowing grin. "About time," the foreman said. "Maria's already planning the wedding feast. Says it'll be the biggest celebration this valley's ever seen." Word spread quickly, as it always did in the territory. But this time, the reactions were more mixed than uniformly hostile. The confrontation in town had shifted something fundamental in Cedar Ridge's collective conscience, while some, like the Pattersons, remained bitter in their opposition. Others saw a chance for the town to redeem itself. Sarah Mackenzie was the first to visit, arriving at the ranch with a basket of sewing supplies. "I thought you might need help with a wedding dress," she said shyly. "Something in color this time." "Blue," Ayanna said immediately. "Like the desert sky after rain." Over the following weeks, an unlikely alliance formed. Women who had shunned Ayanna for years appeared at the guest house with offerings, fabric, recipes, advice both wanted and unwanted. It wasn't complete acceptance, but it was a beginning. The men were more practical in their support. Samuel Cooper forged decorative ironwork for the old cabin that would become the school. Doc Henderson donated medical supplies and promised to teach basic health lessons. Even Dan Murphy, still seeking absolution for years of cowardice, offered credit for school supplies. Not everyone approved. The Pattersons led a vocal minority who predicted doom and demanded the territorial governor intervene. Carl Brennan, his hand healed but his pride still wounded, spread ugly rumors in the saloons. But their influence had waned, especially after several prominent ranchers announced they'd rather do business with a man of principle than bow to the whims of bitter gossips. The wedding was set for Christmas Eve, fulfilling John's original invitation in a way neither had imagined. As the day approached, Ayanna found herself alternating between joy and terror. 3 times she'd made vows. 3 times she'd been widowed. The superstitious part of her, the part that had internalized years of the town's whispers, wondered if she was cursing John by loving him. He found her one evening sitting by the creek, the silver comb he'd given her turning over and over in her hands. "Second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. "Third thoughts. 4th thoughts." She admitted. "John, what if they're right? What if I really am?" "Stop," he said firmly. "You're not cursed. You're not a witch. You're a woman who's had more than her share of sorrow. That's all." He took the comb from her restless fingers and gently worked it into her hair. "Besides, I'm too stubborn to die. Ask anyone. Mary probably thought the same." Ayanna whispered. John was quiet for a moment. "She did," he admitted. "But she died of illness, not some curse, just like your husband's died of human greed and weakness and bad choices. Bad things happen, Ayanna, but good things do too. We just have to be brave enough to accept them." "When did you become so wise?" she asked, leaning into his warmth. "Probably around the time I fell in love with a woman who challenged everything I thought I knew," he replied. "Funny how that works." The day before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived. A young Apache woman, dressed in traditional clothing but with the bearing of someone educated in white schools. She introduced herself as Rose, Ayanna's cousin from the reservation. "I heard about you," Rose said in Apache, her eyes taking in everything: the ranch, John, the preparations for tomorrow's celebration. "The elders sent me to see if it was true, if you had really found peace among the whites." Ayanna answered in the language of her childhood, rusty but returning. "I've found love. Whether that brings peace remains to be seen." Rose stayed the night, and the 2 women talked until dawn. Bridging years of separation, Rose brought news of family Ayanna had thought lost to her, of changes on the reservation, of children who might benefit from the school Ayanna planned. "You could come back," Rose offered. "Your clan would welcome you. This is my place now." Ayanna said, "But perhaps I can build a bridge. The school could be a place where both worlds meet with respect." Rose smiled. "Grandmother always said you were meant for something different. I think she would be proud." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crystalline light that made the desert shimmer like a jewel. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with Reverend Williams officiating, his way of making amends for his earlier condemnation. Ayanna wore the blue dress she and Sarah had sewn together, its simple elegance a far cry from the elaborate black mourning clothes. Her hair was pinned up with a silver comb, and she carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers that Maria had somehow coaxed into bloom. The gathering was larger than expected, along with the ranch hands and the townspeople who'd come to support them. Several Apache families had made the journey, including Rose and 2 elders who remembered Ayanna as a child. The mixing of the 2 communities was awkward at first, but John had arranged for interpreters, and gradually, conversations began to flow. As Ayanna walked toward John, who waited for her in his best suit with Dutch as his best man, she felt the weight of all her past weddings, but also their release. This time was different. This time, she was choosing not from desperation or resignation, but from love and hope. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional with one addition. After the official words were spoken, John turned to the assembled crowd. I want everyone here to witness not just our marriage, but our commitment to this community. All of it. Ayanna and I will build a school where Apache and white children can learn side by side, where understanding can replace fear, where the future can be better than the past. And I, Ayanna added, her voice carrying clearly, commit to being a bridge between peoples, to teaching not just letters and numbers, but respect and empathy, to proving that different traditions can strengthen rather than threaten each other. When Reverend Williams pronounced them married and John kissed his bride, the cheers came from both sides of the cultural divide. It wasn't perfect harmony. There were still suspicious looks and careful distances maintained. But it was a beginning. The celebration that followed was like nothing Cedar Ridge had seen. Maria had indeed outdone herself, preparing foods that honored both traditions. Apache drums mixed with fiddle music. Children who'd been taught to fear each other played together in the barn. And at the center of it all, John and Ayanna danced, lost in each other in the miracle of their unlikely love. As the sun set and the party continued under stars and lanterns, Eleanor Patterson made one last attempt to sour the day. She appeared at the edge of the light, her face twisted with bitterness. "This is an abomination," she declared loudly. "Mixing of races, pagan rituals." "Mrs. Patterson," Ayanna interrupted calmly, "you're welcome to join us. There's food and drink for all, but if you've come only to spread hatred, then I ask you to leave. This is a day for joy." "You'll regret this," Eleanor hissed. "All of you who support this mockery. God will punish." "That's enough." The voice belonged to Harold Patterson, who had appeared behind his wife. "Eleanor, we're leaving now." To John and Ayanna, he added quietly, "I apologize, and congratulations." As the Pattersons departed, their influence finally and completely broken. The celebration resumed with even more enthusiasm. The message was clear. Cedar Ridge was choosing a new path, one that led toward acceptance rather than fear. Late that night, as the last guests departed and the ranch settled into quiet, John and Ayanna stood together on the porch of the main house. The guest house would be converted fully into the school. This was her home now, completely and officially. "No regrets?" John asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "None," Ayanna said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I want to be." "Mrs. McKenna," John murmured, testing the sound of it. "I like it." "So do I," she agreed. "Though I'll still teach under Ayanna. The children should know their teacher has a heritage beyond just being someone's wife." "Fair enough, though I reserve the right to be insufferably proud when introducing you as my wife." Ayanna turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you, John McKenna. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else saw only shadows." "I love you too, Ayanna McKenna. Thank you for being brave enough to step out of those shadows." As they went inside together, the last trace of the widow in black faded into memory. In her place stood a woman reborn through love, a teacher ready to shape young minds, a wife embarking on a new chapter. The transformation was complete, witnessed by stars and celebrated by two communities taking their first tentative steps toward understanding. Tomorrow would bring challenges, building the school, winning over the remaining skeptics, navigating the complex dance of cultural integration. But tonight, there was only joy, only love, only the promise of a future bright as the Arizona dawn. Spring came early to the Arizona territory that year, painting the desert in brilliant splashes of yellow brittlebush and purple lupine. The McKenna School, as it had come to be known, stood ready for its first students, the old cabin transformed by community effort into a bright, welcoming space. Ayanna stood in the doorway, surveying the rows of desks, the books donated from as far as Phoenix, the maps on the walls showing both the territory and the wider world beyond. "Nervous?" John asked, coming up behind her with coffee. "Terrified," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "What if no one comes? What if they come but won't stay? What if you change lives? John interrupted gently. What if you build that bridge you dreamed of? The first to arrive were the Apache children from the reservation, brought by Rose and several cautious parents. Then came Sarah Mackenzie with her daughter Emma, followed by Doc Henderson's granddaughter. By the time the school bell rang, forged by Samuel Cooper specially for the occasion, 12 children sat in the classroom, Apache and white together, all wearing expressions of curiosity mixed with uncertainty. "Good morning," Ayanna said in English, then repeated it in Apache. "Welcome to a place where we will learn from each other." Those first weeks were challenging. Parents on both sides watched warily. Some white families pulled their children out after the first day, unable to accept the mixing. Some Apache parents worried their children would lose their identity. But Ayanna persevered, teaching not just reading and arithmetic, but cultural exchange. Apache children shared stories from their grandparents, while white children taught songs from their tradition. The breakthrough came when little Thomas Cooper, the blacksmith's nephew, fell from a tree during the recess and cut his arm badly. It was Singing Bird, an Apache girl, who knew exactly which plants to gather to stop the bleeding, while another child ran for Doc Henderson. By the time the doctor arrived, the wound was clean and already beginning to heal. "Where did you learn that?" Doc Henderson asked. Impressed, Singing Bird answered shyly in improving English. "My grandmother. She is medicine woman." "Well, you tell your grandmother she taught you well." The doctor said, "Maybe she could teach me a thing or two." Word of the incident spread, and gradually, the ice began to thaw. Parents saw their children learning not just from books, but from each other. Apache children went home with improved English and math skills. White children went home with knowledge of desert survival and respect for the land. But success bred its own challenges. On a warm April morning, Ayanna arrived at the school to find the windows broken and ugly words painted on the walls. Carl Brennan's work, most likely, or others who shared his poisonous views. John was ready to track down the culprits, but Ayanna had a different idea. "We make it a lesson," she said, "about how fear makes people do ugly things, about how we respond to hatred with understanding." The children spent the day cleaning and repairing, working together. When parents arrived to collect them, they found their children not traumatized but empowered, having turned an act of destruction into one of creation. Several fathers stayed to help replace the windows, including men who'd been skeptical of the school initially. "You're doing something important here," one rancher told Ayanna. "My boy comes home talking about his Apache friends like they're just friends. No fear, no strangeness, just friends." As spring turned to summer, the school became a fixture in the community's life. The end-of-term celebration drew families from both cultures, sharing food and watching their children perform songs and stories from both traditions. Even some holdouts attended, drawn by curiosity and the infectious joy of the children. But it was a personal moment that marked the true transformation for Ayanna. She was tending the school's garden, a joint project where Apache children taught traditional planting methods, when she noticed a woman in black standing at the gate. For a moment, her heart clenched, remembering her own years shrouded in mourning clothes. Then she recognized Mrs. Walsh, recently widowed when her husband was thrown from a horse. "Mrs. McKenna," the widow said hesitantly. I heard you understand about loss, about what comes after." Ayanna set down her tools and approached the gate. "Would you like some tea?" They sat together in the shade, two women who knew grief intimately, but where Ayanna had once had no one. Mrs. Walsh had someone who understood, who could say, "The black clothes don't have to define you forever. You can choose when to set them aside." As summer reached its peak, John and Ayanna rode out to their special place by the creek. It had become their tradition, these stolen afternoons when the ranch and school could spare them. They sat by the water, older now than when they'd first met, marked by sun and wind and the passage of eventful years, but more content than either had imagined possible. "Any regrets?" Ayanna asked. echoing his question from their wedding night 6 months prior. "Only one," John said seriously, then smiled at her concerned look. "That we didn't meet sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. We have them now." Ayanna reminded him. "And they're sweeter for the wait." A rider approached, Dutch Stevens, moving fast, both tensed. Old fears never entirely forgotten. But the foreman was grinning as he reined up. "Boss, Mrs. Ayanna, you need to come quick. There's a delegation from Tucson at the house, something about the school." They found 3 well-dressed men waiting on the porch, representatives from the Territorial Education Board. The leader, a Mr. Jameson, got straight to the point. "We've been hearing remarkable things about your school, Mrs. McKenna. Test scores from your students exceed any in the territory. More importantly, you've created a model for cultural integration that people are talking about as far as Washington." Ayanna felt John's hand find hers, steady and supporting. "Thank you, but I'm just teaching children to see each other as human. Precisely what this territory needs." "Mr. Jameson said, we'd like to offer funding to expand, more teachers, more resources. Perhaps even a boarding facility for children from farther reservations. Would you be interested?" "Interested?" Ayanna felt her grandmother's spirit singing. This was beyond her wildest dreams. "Yes," she managed. "Very interested." The men stayed for dinner, during which plans were sketched out that would transform the small school into a regional center for education. As they prepared to leave, Mr. Jameson pulled Ayanna aside. "I knew your first husband," he said quietly. "James Morrison. We served together briefly. He used to talk about his wife. Brilliant, he said, brave and meant for great things. I see he was right." After the delegation left, Ayanna stood in the doorway of the school, looking out at the desert, painted gold by setting sun. John joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "From the widow in black to the woman who's going to change the territory," he said. "Quite a journey." "Our journey," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Sure you could have." John disagreed. "Might have taken longer, but you'd have found a way. You're the strongest person I know. Ayanna McKenna." As if summoned by the moment's perfection, riders appeared on the horizon. But these inspired no fear. They were families, Apache and white. Coming for the evening English class Ayanna had started for adults. Soon the schoolhouse filled with voices, multiple languages blending in the effort to understand each other better. Watching them, Ayanna thought about the woman she'd been, isolated, defined by loss, wrapped in black like a shroud. That woman had served her purpose, had survived when survival seemed impossible. But she was gone now, transformed into something new. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether to John, to the spirit of her grandmother, or to the universe itself, she wasn't sure. The stars were coming out, brilliant in the clear desert air. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called and was answered. The sound no longer seemed lonely to Ayanna. It was simply another voice in the desert's chorus, part of the vast, interconnected web of life that flourished here against all odds. "Shall we go home?" John asked as the last of the evening students departed. "Yes," Ayanna said, taking his offered arm. "Home." They walked together under the stars, past the spot where she'd once struggled alone with flour sacks, past the places where the town had tried to break her, toward the ranch house where lamplight promised warmth and belonging. Behind them, the school stood ready for tomorrow's lessons. Ahead stretched a future bright with possibility. The widow in black was truly gone. Her dark shroud transformed into wings that lifted not just Ayanna, but an entire community towards something better. In her place stood a teacher, a wife, a bridge between worlds, a woman who had learned that love could indeed conquer fear, that understanding could defeat prejudice, and that sometimes the greatest revenge against those who would see you broken is simply to thrive. As they reached the house, Ayanna paused to look back at the journey that had brought them here. Every loss, every moment of despair, every cruel word and lonely night had led to this, a life filled with purpose, a love that strengthened rather than diminished, a community transformed by the simple act of seeing each other as human. "No more looking back," John said gently, understanding her thoughts as he so often did. "No," Ayanna agreed, turning toward their home. "Only forward." The door closed behind them, shutting out the night and sealing in the warmth. Somewhere in the desert, that coyote called again. And this time, Ayanna heard it for what it was. Not a lament for loneliness, but a celebration of survival. A wild joy that echoed her own transformed heart. The woman everyone had avoided, the Apache widow in black, had become the beating heart of a community learning to see beyond fear. And in that transformation lay the proof that love, patience, and courage could rewrite any story, no matter how dark its beginning. Under the vast Arizona sky, the McKenna Ranch settled into peaceful sleep, home to a love story that had begun with a simple act of kindness and bloomed into something that would ripple through generations. The tale of how a woman marked by death became a bringer of life, and how a bitter town learned the sweetness of acceptance. The end was really just another beginning, as all true endings are, and somewhere in the night, the desert bloomed.